Welcome to our second panel discussion, and it's a great pleasure for me to moderate that discussion. And I've come to know this last night that I needed to step in, and may I say on a personal note, is one of these seldom occasions where it was an advantage or where it was better to be from Berlin rather than from Munich or Frankfurt, because my train was on time this morning as opposed to all the traffic that wanted to go out of Munich or Frankfurt. So I stepped in for Daniel Riefer in this panel discussion as the moderator. My name is Matthias Tomenendahl, and I'm a professor of management at Berlin School of Economics and Law. I'm also very grateful that we have three distinguished panelists here. And also, as you maybe saw from the program, we have some changes here, but happy to have our experts here on stage. I'd like to introduce Hedwig Sietsma. She's the Director of Sustainability at KLM. Welcome, Hedwig, to the panel. Then we have Sandra Buhr-Schäfer. She's Senior Vice President, Cabin and Cargo Procurement at Airbus. And she stepped in for Nicolas Chretien, who might surprise us and still come a few minutes later. But thank you that you are here, Sandra. And you bring in, I think, an innovative technological perspective because you had it as a CEO up next at Airbus, an innovation entity for also better sustainability measures. So welcome, Sandra.
Thank you.
And then I'd like to introduce Sergio Nunez. He's the General Manager Marketing and Decarbonization at Shell Aviation. Thank you to the three of you. So the topic of our panel discussion is obviously taking sustainability to the next level, collaborating within the complete ecosystem to decarbonize aviation. So one of our collaboration tools here, as you know, is our app for asking questions and for voting on questions. Please, dear audience, are active in that and use that app. And on the topic, of course, we will discuss here with our experts on stage how they view the situation and what kind of measures they suggest and they evaluate positive for the future. So therefore, I'd like to start with the first round of questions to all of you, kind of making an introductory statement. How do you see sustainability? What is sustainability for you, maybe even personally in your role, but then also in the company? What are you targeting for, basically? And let's start with Hedwig here.
Thank you so much. So first of all, when you want more speaking time in a panel, I think it's good to do a panel in a snowstorm. So I'm very happy today that I can elaborate on KLM sustainability strategy. Thanks for having me. So sustainability, yeah, I think for a company it has been a very important topic for many, many years. I think KLM is seen as a front runner in sustainable aviation. However, we still have a very, very long way to go. I think it was last year when our executive committee, they decided we need sustainability in the heart of our strategy. We really want to pioneer sustainable aviation, be a front runner in the industry, because it is not only important that we decarbonize, it's a must. We see it as a license to operate. Especially in the Netherlands, the current climate around sustainability, it's a harsh climate in which we operate. There's a lot of societal debate. We see a lot of societal debate about growth of aviation, about the growth of Schiphol, and therefore we see becoming more sustainable really as a license to operate. So we have to.
Yes, thank you. How do you define sustainability? Do you also measure basically what are the key pillars?
Yeah. We do. So for us, it's mostly CO2. So first of all, the CO2 emissions that we have, but also I really like the talk from Chretien Aerospace. It's also non-CO2 effects of aviation that we put a lot of effort in towards right now. So we do a lot of research into that area because we see this as really an upcoming field in which we have to act. But it's also around waste and social sustainability.
Okay, interesting. Maybe we get into deeper discussions then in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Sandra, from your perspective, not speaking for all of Airbus possibly, but from your perspective, in your role, what is sustainability for you? How do you define, how do you work towards it?
So as you asked for the personal answer, I'm really taking the same words you're doing. For me, sustainability is our license to operate. We need it as an industry. I believe that aerospace is a fantastic tool. Many of you have probably taken an airplane joining this conference today. I want our children and the children of our children to be able to continue to discover the world, to engage with new cultures, to have exchanges. And I'm not talking about the relevance in the overall economical system of planes. So I think we all are convinced about it, but it can only go if we decarbonize the skies. And I think we recognized that very early. And Jürgen mentioned our mission this morning at Airbus. We pioneer sustainable aerospace for a safe and united future. And I think we decided that a few years back already, way before actually sustainability had this acceleration we are seeing today. And I think we'll speak about it later, about how it accelerates, and it has been accelerating over the last year. So clearly, I think it's our duty. It's our duty, yes, for flight operation, which is a bigger part. 97% of our emissions are in the scope 3 in the operation of our aircraft, but we also have an impact on the ground operation, and we have an impact in our scope 1 and 2. How do we build our planes, and how is our supply chain acting? So I think all of that goes into it, and we need to find answers for each of those topics.
Good. So decarbonization is key, as you both say, but it's not the only sustainability element that you are talking about, right? Okay, Sergio, same question to you. Kind of an introductory statement on sustainability. How do you see it? How do you work towards it?
Thanks, Matthias. So I'll start maybe with the Shell Aviation view, and then I'll zoom into my own personal thoughts. So for us, I mean, aviation is a very important sector, right? It connects people, it drives progress, but at the same time, it generates emissions. We all know that. And it's a hard-to-abate sector. And so we're talking about 2% of the total CO2 emissions in 22. But the challenge we have is that as the industry grows, and at the same time other sectors are finding it easier to decarbonize, then that percentage will continue to increase. So we don't want to find ourselves in a position that we are 25% of emissions in a few years, right? So we need to do something. And that's where we play a big role. That's why Shell tries to focus on those sectors that are difficult and hard to abate, because we believe that's where we can apply our levers and where we can really make a difference there. So we do believe that the industry can get to net zero in 2050. We are working towards that. And we believe that it's a joint effort, I guess, hence the topic of this panel, right? It's not something that one party can do in isolation. We need to look at all the elements in the value chain, from producers to airports to OEMs to airlines, corporates. Everybody needs to play a role, because the challenge is huge, right? And one of the elements of the challenge we will talk about later is cost, and the huge cost of SAF, which is the most scalable solution that we have right now to decarbonize aviation. So we are at Shell, we are basically playing in a number of areas to help decarbonize aviation. On the molecule side, we are very active. We recently closed a deal with Montana Renewables, where we are bringing product to LAX, and a number of airlines are working with us in LAX for that, but we also increasing the number of airports that we supply SAF to. Recently, we had an announcement with Rotterdam Airport, which I think is a very good milestone. We see more and more airports are getting directly involved into trying to get more SAF into their own airports. And we are also working, we're still very active on the natural-based solutions and offset space. That's something that's always part of our offer, and still remains one of the elements of the solution. We need to focus on all the different elements, but carbon credits are still there. And I also wanted to mention, I think that's very relevant for this audience, we do have a number of efforts going on in our aviation lubricant space. So we launched last year a carbon compensated lubricants effort, which basically means that every single drop of lubricant that we now sell is carbon compensated, and we do that ourselves. So we're not just passing on to the customers or anything. We're just doing it ourselves. And we are also looking at other elements of supply chain in our lubricant supply chain, etc., to really avoid and reduce the emissions as well. So we're trying to play all the areas. And then from my personal point of view, as I said at the beginning, the challenge gets even more exciting when you're in a very difficult sector. I think we've seen other sectors that are a little bit easier or cheaper to abate, but here, when we face such a big challenge, I mean, for me personally, it's a great opportunity, and I enjoy it every day working with my team to try to to do some of these things.
Okay, thank you very much also for your introductory statements. So maybe we talk a little bit about topics and say how we see the industry currently, what is maybe the roadmap, and some first questions already come for how fast we can go, and the capacities will be there, and then maybe some of also the stakeholders in the ecosystem, be it also the political arena with regard to regulations, maybe passengers also, and others. So, but starting with kind of the current situation, Sander, you said Airbus has already started with a lot of measures before we have seen an accelerated phase, an acceleration as now. What is your view? Is that your view on the current situation, on the current momentum in the industry? Is it there? Is it fast? Could it be even faster? What do you think?
So I would say that over the last year, actually, we really saw an acceleration. There was ICAO agreeing on the long-term aspirational goal, where we changed actually the goal from reducing by 50% to a net zero in 2050, which I think is a very strong sign from the industry. There was also the SCAF 3 with objectives on SAF, which were clearly stated. And I think we go from something which was an aspirational goal and a bit vague in something which has now hard lines and targets that are defined. And I think that helps the industry to accelerate. It helps because the regulatory bodies are setting a framework in which we can work. It also allows for a level playing field, which is absolutely important, and there's still more work to be done on that. But it sets a framework which is there. So my personal view would be that thanks to all these initiatives, there is indeed an acceleration and a better framework which helps us to deliver into it.
Hedwig, do you share that view? Are we in a good momentum at the moment?
I think there certainly is momentum. I think after COVID, the industry realized that we have to change, at least in our company. There was a big realization that things couldn't go on as we used to do everything. So for us, momentum was created right there. We see now that momentum is also, I just refer to the societal debate in the Netherlands, that momentum is also created by that. We have climate activists in front of our door saying that we have to change. We see climate disasters more and more also in Europe, and that also creates momentum. On the other hand, now we have set the goals. We have set the long-term aspirational goal. We have set the goals as airlines, and we also see that now we need to come into action to actually reach those goals. And I think now we also start to feel the pain that comes with that. And the cost, I already saw some nice questions about costs related to SAF. We also have to bear the costs that come with that. And now we have to make the hard choices now. And now we have to show that we really mean what we've said, and that we will do what we've said we promised. And that's, so I think the momentum is certainly there.
Okay, so externally definitely, so we have targets as the overall industry, we have pressures from stakeholders, and you already referred to that first question that is directly related to you at KLM. Here the statement is made, KLM will certainly comply with EU regulations within the next 10 years on new fuels. Does KLM know how to deal with the cost without visibility on the regulatory framework so far?
Yeah, so first of all, you have to comply with EU regulation. And we're very happy that it's there because it's creating a level playing field. So inside Europe, at least, we have a level playing field if we talk about, for example, SAF refuel, the 6% in 2030 that refuels prescribing us. However, we want to go above and beyond that. So at KLM, we have this goal shared with many other airlines to have, and many other partners in the industry, to at least have 10% of SAF worldwide. And the question is actually, how do you bear those costs? Because that's not something that other airlines inside of Europe have to comply with. And we see, on the one hand, that we have now a 1% SAF surcharge for our customers, already voluntarily putting 1% of SAF into our tanks every year, and making the customer pay for that by putting 1% extra surcharge on our ticket. That's a very small amount of SAF. However, it's already a step in the right direction. On the other hand, we see corporate accounts also having to reduce their CO2 emissions and willing to pay, actually, to reduce their CO2 emissions. So they are a very big part and very valuable part of our decarbonization strategy, because they're also willing to put in the money to pay for the extra cost.
The 10% is the goal for 2050?
2030.
2030.
2030,
Yeah. So talking about that, Serge, and then relating also to the question that was still there when I looked at it last time. Are you ready to scale up far enough for SAF production for these kind of, to realize these kind of targets? Is the momentum there also from your point of view?
Yeah, the demand is very important, right, for producers to be able to have the signal and to make the commitment to invest in production. So definitely what we are seeing, whether it is incentives or mandates, but anything that stimulates the demand, including tapping into other segments like corporates, which it's very, very important for us to be able to increase that demand. It's fundamental. So we welcome all of those things, and of course all of those things are very important in terms of our production decisions. Of course, then everything needs to go into an investment funnel with returns, etc., etc. And that is where some of the elements of policy come very, very strongly, right? I think we have a question later about policy and regulation, but we believe that a clear and aligned and globally aligned policy is very, very important for us to help. If you start to see policies that diverge from countries and that make certain countries very attractive versus others, that's not going to help, right? So we understand that there is a need for some local elements, right? It needs to be, as we say, locally relevant, but globally aligned. So we need to have that level playing field that governments create so that we can all compete in a fair way and we can create those solutions. And that's going to be very, very important if we really want to scale SAF, because otherwise you're going to have very, very localized efforts which are not going to be benefiting the industry globally. So for us, again, demand signal is very, very important, being able to tap into all possible sectors, and also a very clear policy. I mean, you see sometimes decisions from governments to do this, to do that, right? All of those things are looked at very, very carefully when we look at the investment decisions.
Okay. If I may, because this is a very important point that you're making. We see, especially in Europe, we see governments now making their own legislation and having their own actions against aviation. However, we have this beautiful Fit for 55 package in Europe. Stick with that instead of creating a patchwork of regulation. I think it's really not effective, especially in Europe, where CO2 goes over borders so quickly, where the level playing field is so easily destroyed. Governments should really focus on European, worldwide, and if not, European legislation.
Okay, so the legislation, you already hinted to that. If I may ask again, because there are still two questions and challenge a bit more, Sergio. So we see as a new question right now, PwC found, and now the question is gone. No, we still see it, that there will not be enough capacity, basically. That was a study for SAF production. And the kind of second question we see number 2, what are the plans of Shell to scale the SAF production? Could you...
Well, I think, again, as I said, the big challenge we have is around cost, right? So we see more and more airlines making commitments to do X% of SAF. So in some cases, it's even above the mandates, right? So they're really making that commitment, but that commitment needs to translate into actually being able to buy and to pay for the SAF, right? And if you think about the cost of SAF, it goes from 2 times to 8 times more expensive than conventional jet, right? And if we are talking about the percentage of the bill for an airline, then you don't have, you do the math and it starts to become very, very relevant. If you put 30% of the cost at 8x, then that gives you a very big number. So that is the challenges we see, is really translating those ambitions into actual sales and into actual who is going to pay for that, right? And again, that's where the role of corporates is so important for us. I mean, airlines are seeing it, but we're also seeing it as well. If we can find a way that the emissions reduction that comes from using SAF can be claimed by different parties, not only the airlines, but also the corporate travelers, then you start to see a way of splitting that bill and finding innovative ways of increasing the affordability of SAF. We are doing a lot of work in that space, as well as many of the airlines and other players here in the ecosystem. But we do believe that, again, back to policy, adoptance and acceptance of some of those carbon accounting mechanisms is going to be key for scaling up the demand and therefore investing more in SAF.
Okay.
We're not there yet in terms of NGO acceptance and then governments following up, but we think that the momentum is there. There's so much discussion right now about that, so we hope that that will come through very quickly.
So another question popped up that asked for the role of Airbus. Would you want to engage, or do you plan to engage boosting SAF, production demand in any way?
I would even open a bit up the question. I think sustainability is key, and there's not one single bullet, one answer to finding a solution to sustainability. And what is important is that we do work on all aspects. The first one being to actually reduce the consumption of our airplanes, and this is what the whole industry has been showing over the last decades. Every new generation of airplanes brings between 15 to 25% reduction in fuel consumption, which is already a big step, meaning that if we were to replace all the older fleets with new ones, we have already a significant pass. Then we need to continue in that direction and work for the next generation that will be even more efficient. And clearly, the propulsion system is one aspect, and we'll come to SAF and hydrogen a bit later, maybe. But there are other aspects to it. We need to have more efficient wings, where we can actually reduce the overall consumption. We need to look into air traffic management, because 10% of the emissions could be saved if we would have worldwide a much more optimized air traffic management, meaning you do not need to change anything on today's technologies. And all these elements need to go into the equation. And clearly, if you talk about a long-range aircraft, you will have a different solution than and SAF plays a very key role there. Then if we talk about a short-range aircraft or even an eVTOL, where electric solution could be a potential. So again, it's important to really target the product and the mission and find the right solution that is the appropriate one for that mission. Now, yes, if we talk about long-range aircraft, clearly SAF is a very important factor, and we need to have a triggering momentum to encourage, on a level playing field worldwide, the possibility to use more and more SAF. And we are leading the way in that sense, that for our operations, internal operations today at Airbus, being it our Beluga airplanes, being it our airplanes that we fly with our customers before the deliveries, or being even it our shuttles where we fly from one location to the other, this year we'll have a consumption of 10% of SAF. So it's very important for us to also lead the way, because there's a necessity to trigger the production, to be able to bring it to the right location, and all this ecosystem needs also to be faster to be able to put it at large scale.
Mm-hmm. We see that a new chair is brought to the stage, and that seems to be the sign that we may welcome another expert here on stage. Yes, please go ahead.
Welcome.
Welcome. We have Nicolas Chretien. He's the Senior Vice President and Group Head of Sustainability and Environment at Airbus. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I finally
stage.
made it. So glad to be here. Thank you.
We are very happy, and I'd like to also give you the chance to make an opening statement, kind of a broad one, towards what does sustainability mean for you, for your company, and maybe combine it with one question that already comes from the audience. What is Airbus doing to embed a sustainability DNA in the company? Maybe something that you are responsible for and have already thought about. Nicolas.
Well, so first of all, and perhaps Sandra already alluded to it, I think we have placed sustainability at the heart of our company purpose and strategy. We want to pioneer sustainable aerospace. We want to pioneer sustainable mobility and security solutions. And eventually, we have to define what will make the aerospace ecosystem sustainable in 10, 20, or 30 years. And we have defined for this actually 4 main commitments at company level. One is very much related to our climate challenge that we face, and that probably we'll be discussing here. But we also want to look at more broadly aspects with regards to resilience to access to key resources, specifically as we look at the energy and climate transitions as putting more pressure on access to resources. We're looking also at how we can be more vigilant in our approach towards surveying our very deep supply chain, towards actually mitigating some of the negative impacts we could see on fundamental human rights. And more broadly, I would say that we want to help develop in a purposeful way as well innovations towards doing good and actually creating enablement for society to meet some of the key challenges we face. So that's what sustainability is. It's a big menu. So we have to, I would say, slice and dice the elephant a little bit. And this is where, when it comes to, I would say, our climate ambition and strategy, there's a lot we're doing in trying to reroute this in terms of decision-making for our company everywhere. That means the way we select our suppliers, the way we actually engage our industrial footprint and operations. And I heard Sandra talking about how we're deploying sustainable aviation fuels to walk the talk for our own operations. And eventually how we want to develop products in the future, taking into account the value of carbon. And we have embedded, by the way, as a decision-making process within our company, a shadow carbon price mechanism at 150 euro a ton. That's ahead of where you see actually the ETS carbon price. But that's a way for us to anticipate the real value. And the good thing with carbon is you can put a value sticker to it. But we want to go beyond this to be able to prepare the next generation of aircraft in particular. And this is where there is no value for zero-emission tailpipe solutions. We have to pioneer those solutions to enable actually fundamentally the resilience of our industry and our sector.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we go to the topic of regulation, because that has already been touched by some of you, and Hedwig, you brought that up as well. What is your view on the kind of European policies? How do you see, also from a global perspective, let's say, for example, the Refuel EU initiative, SAF support, also versus the American IRA? What implications do the different mechanisms have globally? What is your view on this, and what should happen?
First of all, I think we all see that regulation is needed. So we really need policymakers to create effective climate policy. In an ideal world, you would like this on a global level. So you would like ICAO to really step up and create global policies. However, that's very difficult with aviation, and I understand why. So we're happy that the European Union stepped up and created this legislation for aviation. We really support Refuel EU. We lobbied actually for Refuel EU. We want SAF to have good standards, so we want high quality SAF. We see that the directive that prescribes what kind of feedstocks you can and can't use as a good thing, because we want aviation to truly become sustainable. There are other packages inside Refuel EU as well, which we also, inside Fit for 55 as well, which we also welcomed. The only thing we say, European tax, we want policy that really creates a more sustainable sector. So if there's a tax, it needs to go back into the sector, and we need to invest it in a more sustainable future for aviation. On a whole, we also see in the Netherlands that politicians are acting also on a national scale. In this case, I already stepped upon it a little bit. We see that a lot of our routes are prone to carbon leakage. 22% of our routes are actually prone to carbon leakage, if already with the EU Fit for 55 package in place, let alone if you create policy on a national level. So we really say create effective climate policy, and that's either on European or national or global level. Yeah.
Sergio, what is your view? Is European legislation good enough to compete on an international and a global dimension?
We are happy that there is a package now, right? Because we always say it's better to have something that not to have anything. So definitely we're very happy. I would have liked to see a little bit more in terms of the percentages, but that's fine. I think we can work with this. But the very, very important piece is the clarity, right? I mean, we do have something out there, but I can see now on an almost daily basis when we engage with airlines for contracts starting in 25 that there is still uncertainty around certain elements of refuel. And without that certainty, it's very, very difficult to really accelerate the contracts and the supply of SAF. So for example, the flexibility mechanism, which is something that the European Union is working on, right? So how is that going to work? Are we going to look at a percentage for all your flights in Europe? Does it matter where you get the SAF? Or are we going to have it at country level? I mean, we all know that we're not going to have SAF in every airport in 2025, right? So how is this going to work? And that is very, very important, because not all airlines fly to every airport, right? So all the airlines are looking at what is my network, where am I flying, and how can I engage with my suppliers to make sure that I have that SAF. But if I am delivering an X% in a certain country in 2 airports, and that airline is not flying to any of those airports, how's that going to work for that airline, right? And the situation for me as supplier is not very different from the situation as another suppliers, because you're looking at supply chain costs, you're looking at molecules costs, you're looking at the same type of levers. So that clarity, in my view, is not enough to just put something out there and then you just figure it out. We need to really get to that next level of granularity, and then we can work with it. We can find solutions with our customers to deliver the SAF. But if the uncertainty is there until the 30th of December, 31st of December 2024, it's not going to help us to accelerate, right? That's
Okay,
what I see.
I understand. Nicolas,
If I may ask a question, how do you look at the voluntary pledges of airlines? A lot of airlines say we want to go above and beyond the mandate. We really need it to reach our CO2 targets. For us, in our science-based targets roadmap, we maybe even we see numbers that if we want to close the gap with SAF alone, we have to go even beyond the 10%. Do you see this as a statement of the industry as well, or is it that you produce up to the mandate and that's it?
No, we look in our supply-demand balances, we take into account both the mandate numbers and the voluntary demand that we see from airlines. Obviously, we look at the commitments that airlines have made. In other cases, we look at what airlines tell us, even if it's not a commitment, right? Their own aspiration with us as a supplier. So we take all of that into account. Okay. And we do think that we're going to get there to that point that there is going to be, the ramp up is significant, right? You can see the numbers today and you can see the numbers in 2030. There's a significant ramp up also on voluntary demand, because if you look at refuel, it's looking at 6%, and a lot of airlines have committed to 10%, and even in some cases 12.5 for 2030. So there needs to be SAF to justify that demand. And then you also have the sub-mandates, right? So you got the e-fuels sub-mandate, and how's that gonna work? So we look at everything. Just to answer your question, we look at the voluntary as well, and we hope that we are able also to supply that voluntary as well.
Nicolas, how do you look at regulation from a global perspective?
So for us, regulation is one of the key, I would say, and it's one of the bedrock that we need to build up, specifically as if you look into sustainable aviation fuels, we're starting from scratch. We're starting from zero. And I think as we are ramping it up, I think, in a sense, regulation can help provide additional visibility as to where we need to be out. This is why we've been actually advocating to be at quite an ambition, yet I think meaningful SAF blend by 2030, a 10% that we had anchored, which is ahead of what we've seen in Refuel EU. But this is where we see a lot of convergence coming from the airline industry that's very much backed by, I would say, the International Energy Agency scenarios. And I think we have to adopt these ambitious, I would say, trajectories. I think there is a different approach, obviously, between the US and Europe, and you alluded to IRA. I think we need incitative, I would say, measures. The big, I would say, not that we need to crack is around the extra cost, obviously, that we see in SAF, specifically as we are ramping up capacity. I think the US has been very effective, and obviously having deep pockets and enabling actually the ramp up of SAF effectively for the US domestic, but also effectively trying to position the US as a potential exporter also on SAF. So I think all measures that are incitative, I think, are good. I think we don't want to see more, I would say, additional prescriptive or banning measures. We need to look at how once we define also those measures, establishing, for instance, mandates, how we define also the policies, specifically in terms of funding, that help accompany the development of this. So regulation is key, but I would say that it needs to work out against also a solid baseline in terms of accompanying the funding of projects, and we are monitoring on our side the project pipeline. We're falling short of where we need to be at actually by 2030. And we need also to prime the demand signal. But I think here again, we've seen that regulation both in Europe and in US has been quite good in actually driving some of that demand specifically from the airline industry.
Yeah, okay. Sandra, representative of procurement, maybe therefore I'd ask the question which we have on the top of the list to you. How does Airbus consider sustainability aspects when selecting a supplier or sourcing a specific product?
It's clearly an important factor. When you select a supplier, there are different aspects to it. The traditional aspects around competitiveness, around industrial capabilities, etc., they remain, of course, because you have seen we have a huge backlog and a big ramp up to achieve. So these are aspects we will be looking at as well. And there is indeed a sustainability criteria which goes beyond the product sustainability. It goes into the aspects Nicolas mentioned with Human Rights Act, with the full transparency of the supplier, but not only our tier one, but all the tiers below them, to have a full transparency throughout the supplier landscape and to meet those societal and sustainable targets.
Mm-hmm. Could you address current endeavors in social sustainability topics, which often are somewhat neglected in discussions? We just see as a question that has popped up. So how about social sustainability with regard to supplies and overall?
Yes, I
Nicolas.
alluded obviously to our approach towards safeguarding human rights across our value chain, which is, I think, an important topic. We understand that whilst we have, I would say, a very value-add type of supply chain, there is some areas where we could actually be exposed specifically to forced or child labor, for instance. So we have developed a number of monitoring measures through, obviously, the implementation of our corporate due diligence and duty of care framework to try to, as Sandra was alluding to try to understand the potential risk we're exposed to, not just with the tier ones, but with the lower tiers. This actually entails having much more visibility. If we look at, for instance, key raw material flows, how do we ensure actually and establish the full chain of custody, understanding the point at source. And we've seen actually more and more those social matters also be coming in from a regulatory standpoint. So we've seen the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act in the US. There's a number of forced labor regulations that we are trying to anticipate, where we will need actually to establish the full transparency into our supply chain. And let's be mindful of this as well. We as an industry collectively, the aerospace industry, are probably lagging behind other sectors in having established actually a strong and robust data set and a transparent framework to help collect this data. But when we talk about social, it's not just about mitigating negative digit growth in terms of RPKs. That's already a lot of growth. And by the way, that growth is not something we have set for ourselves. We looked into it. The IEA is saying this industry can grow, but it needs to grow at a pace which is compatible with the pace at which we can actually incubate new technologies and the pace at which the new energy ecosystems needs to develop. So that's the only thing we're saying. So let's forget about all of the scenarios and the scenarios that makes it possible or impossible. Let's focus on what we need to do, and this is what we are busy doing. So let's make our products more efficient. Let's develop the energy ecosystems, because we're busy chatting about it, but eventually, if we don't start now, nothing happens, right? And then God knows if humanity will want to change actually its entire consuming patterns, but at least we are doing our share, and that's the message I'm sending.
Okay, thank you. Sandra, you were also inclined to comment?
Well, then, building up on what Nicolas has said, I think, again, we shouldn't look for one single solution. I think we should take all the different solutions we are available. Some of it is fleet renewal. Yes, of course, it means you need to be able to invest into it. Others are simple measures like the cabin, for example. The airlines change their cabin every 7 years in average. We are looking into how do we make the cabin more sustainable, to have a full life cycle assessment around it, new materials, even new habits in how you use the cabin. Will you be able to take any food in tomorrow in the cabin, or do you pre-order just to carry the weight you need, because every weight is additional CO2? So there are things at a smaller scale, I would say, we should also take into the equation and embed into what we can do today. And the other example I mentioned was air traffic management. This is clearly something where you do not need any new technology. You need to optimize the skies. And if we do so, we already gain the 10%. So again, I would encourage to, we shouldn't discard any small solution. Every little bit of it will bring a contribution to it, and the integration of everything will make it happen to get to the overall targets.
Okay, thank you. So it's already time for the final round. One last statement by each of our panelists. And if we look at our topic again, collaborating within the complete ecosystem to decarbonize aviation, my last question would be, what kind of is that you would have for the next years to speed up and to collaborate even better? Hedwig, you are sitting next to me. Is there any stakeholder in the ecosystem that you have a particular wish from for the next years, over the next years,
I
to
think
collaborate better?
I cannot choose, because what you said, we need everyone. So we need everyone in the ecosystem. There's no silver bullet for aviation. So what I see now is we focus a lot on sustainable aviation fuel, and I think it's great because it is indeed a low carbon fuel, and that's we need to do everything that we can, but we also need to focus on all the other things we can do, and we need all the players in the industry. So I'm talking to Airbus, I'm talking to Shell, and I think that's very, very good. But if you want me to single out one thing, I want to single out the airlines, because we're in the end the ones that should take all these solutions and really implement them. We created something that's called I'm going over time, I'm sorry, but it's the Sustainable Flight Challenge, in which we invited all airlines to join us and create more sustainable solutions on their flight. We do that in a fun, accessible way, and we see that we really learn a lot from each other. We have an open source mechanism in which we have one system, and we can take all of their solutions out of that system. We need to see sustainability the same as safety. We do not have to compete on it. We need to show each other that we can actually have a more sustainable future as aviation, and really collaborate.
Yes, good. Looking at yourself, so very good answer. And Sandra?
Well, it needs all the players, clearly. I think one thing we all have in common is we need talents to make it happen. So my pledge will be to this community. I think we're all into the aviation business. We all love it. And I think we all believe it's feasible. It won't be feasible if the best talents of the world do not want to join us. So I think it's our duty to actually show that there is a pathway, and to encourage the young generation to join us, to bring in their brilliant ideas, and to help us make this transition that, yes, will be difficult, difficult, but into which we have engaged and to which we think there is a solution. So it would be an encouragement for all of us to make sure that future generations do not turn their back on aviation, but really come with us and help us solving that problem.
Good, thank you. Sergio.
So, I mean, I'm with you. We cannot really choose one single partner, but I would say the concept of partnership is that important, right? Even when we go into contractual negotiations or into commercial agreements, that we take into account that this is a new product when I think about SAF, and things are not going to be perfect from day one, right? Plants will have hiccups. In a small production environment, a hiccup will be felt much more than when you have conventional jet that you can always cover with other plants. So we need to be patient and we need to be collaborative and work this as a partnership, because we all benefit from achieving the end goal. But the journey to get there is not as smooth as maybe when we talk about other industries. So we need to keep that. And the last one I would say is all of us as end consumers, we need to also think about how important it is for us, and also when we need to pay a little bit more for something which is more sustainable in terms of travel, will we be happy to do it, because it starts with all of us, right?
Okay, thank you. Nicolas, final wish to the community.
We're already over time, so I'll try to be brief, but perhaps the best proof of the fact that we need all partners to sit together is the fact that even though that panel was incomplete due to weather conditions, I mean, imagine just like 3, 4, 5 years ago, we have actually Shell sitting next to Airbus, sitting next to, airlines and airports, and I think that's the, we have all of the ingredients of the puzzle. Eventually, we've been looking at Jet A as a commodity which was relatively cheap and available in the past. For me, that's the biggest actually challenge that we face as an industry, is that energy will no longer be cheap and as affordable and available as it was in the past. So what does this mean for all of us? And the fact that we're looking at it from different parts and saying, okay, well, where can we partner? I think that's the right step forward.
Great. Thank you very much to all of you for this partially spontaneous activity here on stage, for being here. Thank you to the audience. And now there's time to get into more collaboration or to start to foster collaboration, having a nice lunch together and nice chats, and afterwards then be back. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.